Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. I was going to ask the speakers to take their seats, but they already have taken their seats because we were supposed to have a podium. So we've expedited the process. Well, let me start off by wishing you a great afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Rickey Yada. I'm a proud UBC alum, and I'm a professor and dean of the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia. Whether you're joining us in the room today or virtually, I'm honored to be your host for the program. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, we are using live captioning to ensure the event is more accessible and inclusive. And just a note here, Karen, who's our Director of Communications, I'm actually going to follow script, so you don't have to worry about what I say. Let me start off with a traditional land acknowledgement. Today, we're gathered on the Coast Salish territory. This is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Stolo Nation, including the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. I also hope that wherever you're joining us from, that you acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. And if you wish to learn more about the lands you sit on, I recommend the online resource native-land.ca, which I believe is up on the screen. So on behalf of the UBC Faculty of Land and Food Systems, I'd like to welcome you and thank you in advance for helping create a respectful and inclusive environment for our fellow alumni, guests, and speakers. So in just a few moments, I'll introduce our speakers and invite them to join me, not on stage because they already are on stage. And the conversation will begin with a moderated discussion. And following this, we'll be taking questions both from our in-person audience here and virtual audiences via Slido, our online engagement platform. Hopefully you'll have received instructions on how to use Slido in the reminder email for this event. And some of you have already inputted questions, so thank you very much. But as a quick reminder to enter your questions, please go to slido.com and use our event code agriculture to sign in, and you'll see these instructions on the screen. So today we're here to talk about the future of agriculture. And we are delighted to have 4 special guests with us, each with a unique insight into the topic. And leading the conversation will be our University of British Columbia President and Vice-Chancellor, Santa Ono. So thank you, Santa, for coming back as our moderator. From the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I think the thing that has jumped out in the agricultural community, as well as the general community, is the issues around food security and food supply. A year ago in February, our first webinar on the future of agriculture attracted over 400 registrants with attendees from around the world. So in light of that, we knew we needed to continue the dialogue on the future of agriculture. And this year, we're excited to be part of the Pacific Agricultural Show. So today we'll discuss building a stronger agricultural food system, especially in light of recent challenges. And we aim to come away with a greater understanding of some of these issues and opportunities ahead. So without further ado, let's get started. And it's my pleasure to do a few introductions. 3 of our speakers today are speakers from our last year's Future of Agriculture webinar. So the first speaker I'll introduce is UBC alumna Meeru Dhalwala, who is an author, chef, and restaurateur. She's also an advisory board member for our faculty, and it's been a pleasure knowing Meeru for a number of years. She's definitely a powerhouse of global thought and local attraction. And just to let people know, she has received an honorary degree from UBC in recognition of her contributions to the food system. Our second speaker is no stranger to the faculty, and that's UBC alum Peter Dillon, who's the chairman of the Ocean Spray Board of Directors and president and CEO of Richberry Group. Peter also chaired the BC Food Security Task Force report, whose findings were presented in 2020, and I had the pleasure of rolling out that report with Peter and his co-authors. Our third speaker is John Stackhouse. John is the Senior Vice President in the Office of the CEO at RBC. And we're very pleased to have John with us today. John traveled from Toronto. I understand, John, you've been in the province for a week. So hopefully you got to enjoy some of the scenery in BC. And John came to us last year and discussed Farmer 4.0, his iconic report on the new thoughts about how agriculture may be in the future and is transforming into. Our fourth speaker is new to the panel this year and is a UBC alumni, Kat Jim. Kat works as a sustainability consultant at PINA, sustainability at the intersection of food and resource economics. So welcome to all of our speakers today, our panel members, and thank you for joining us. And I'd like now to turn the mic over to our president, Santa Ono.
Thank you very much, Ricky, and welcome everyone, whether you're actually joining us here in person or virtually. I'm so happy to be here with you for this very important conversation. Continue on from our last conversation around this very important topic. I want to first acknowledge the fact that those in the Fraser Valley have had tremendous challenges recently. Last year, the summer drought followed by fall floods had a devastating impact in the valley. And many of our students and faculty hail from this area. And so we're thinking about you as you recover, affected farms, what's had on the farms that have been held by families for many generations, and the negative impact of that on your livelihoods and displacing people from your homes. So we have all of you in our thoughts. I want to recognize the people of the Fraser Valley for their strength and hard work, and we know your resilience as you work to resolve these challenges that are significant, and that's be part of our conversation today. And I want to acknowledge the important role that you have in the food system, not just here in BC, but across Canada. And actually seeing this conference today and all the machinery and all that's required to really feed Canadians and British Columbians is really an awe-inspiring sight, I got to tell you. Some of you may be aware that UBC will be opening a campus in Surrey. And we're listening to people in the Fraser Valley to ensure that the new Surrey campus addresses the needs of this community. So I welcome you to contact me. My handle is UBC Pres, that's with a Z, or you can just email me at sjo@ubc.edu or .ca. As Ricky mentioned, I'm going to start with some questions of my own and then move on to your questions that are going to pop up here by magic, by Slido. I'm going to start with you, Meeru. I'd like to begin with you. Is that okay? I got two questions for you. When you look back on this past year since our last discussion about the future of agriculture, what are your current thoughts, especially within the restaurant industry sector? Have they changed since that last conversation?
The last time we spoke, the restaurant industry, for the most part, many of us were either shut down or just opening at maybe 50% capacity. The fear level was quite high amongst the population. We were like knee deep in the pandemic. Today, I'm speaking to you, at least in terms of British Columbia, and all of us are feeling this kind of fearful, but quite excited. We are on that cusp of getting back to normal, hopefully. So all of us have our fingers crossed that the tourism is going to come back. The sixth wave isn't going to really be that much of an impact on us. And so we are all preparing ourselves for probably about 90% of pre-pandemic summer. In Vancouver, especially, tourism is a really big deal as well. Now, some of the pluses and the minuses here at the last talk. So in the restaurant industry, well, first of all, I feel like I'm sitting here as a representative in terms of agriculture and food, but I'm the cultural input here, right? Restaurants, we're part of the local culture, we're part of the local economy, and we can use our pedestal to almost promote what is happening in the food world in British Columbia. So some of us Vidge's restaurant, once the season starts hitting, a lot of my produce, a lot of the produce starts coming from the British Columbia here. Soyuz, even Surrey. It depends on what we're getting. This year, the prices are changing like this. I'm going to compare it to a pre-pandemic. If a price were changing, you would get sometimes a 2 weeks heads up or a 1 month heads up. And the prices would change maybe like once every 3 months, maybe once every 6 months, but I could plan my summer menu around this time and it would take me all the way through the end of Labor Day. I could plan my menu prices. I could plan what I'm going to be paying my staff. I can staff everything. And I can also start projecting, because summer is when we earn the money to take us through winter while we're kind of asleep. And just to give you an example, so at Vidge's, my number one key is seafoods. My seafoods, they must be sustainable, cannot be, any sort of even remotely considered endangered. So seafood is my number one priority for my spending. Number two are all of my meats and poultry. So beef, pork, chicken, I'm missing one, lamb. So that's my number two priority in terms of how I'm spending it. The minimal is raised without antibiotics. Free range doesn't really mean much in my world. So it must be free range, raised without antibiotics, minimum. Number three then is the produce that I'm getting. I'm really, really good at, doing 1, 2, and 3 in the past 27 years. Number four is the pulses, the chickpeas and the lentils and the rice and everything. And so I would say in the past month, chicken has gone up by $2.25 a kg. And I'm not getting a proper email anymore. I get a text message. I've already ordered the chicken, and heads up, just to let you know, the chicken has gone up by $2. I'm adjusting myself very randomly. The heads up is not just a heads up. It's like, oh my goodness, my menu cost. So I'm trying to determine right now is my customer, they say about 68% of people right now, at least in BC, the first thing they want to do is, we can't wait to go out and eat. We're going to go to the restaurants. But I'm trying to gauge, are they ready to, wow, the last time we ate the lamb, it was $28. Are they going to notice that this time is $33, right? We don't want to lose the customer, but what do I do with the food costs? My staff, right? Staff is ready, especially restaurant staff, right? We're ready to earn some money. We've been unemployed. We've been lesser employed. And so I've got staff ready to earn money. We've got customers ready to come in. Beef has gone up by $3, I would say. Everything, milk has gone up. And I'm having a tough time right now gauging, is my customer ready to absorb the full cost? And is this going to be the full cost? Other restaurants are just choosing, let's not even go the small farmer route. Let's just go the Cisco route. Let's just go straight to the big organizations. And because they've got the power to purchase, they're a little bit more consistent in their pricing. The other thing is now delivery costs. And again, the smaller the farmer, the smaller the business, I should say, not the farmer size, but the smaller the farm, delivery becomes an issue as well. And the timings are changing. And these might seem kind of small to the audience, but if I'm running a restaurant, if a delivery is supposed to be coming on a Thursday and it's staffed, but then suddenly they're piggybacking off another delivery and they show up on Wednesday and there's no staff, every single thing adds up to the expenses. So we're excited, but it's not exactly a safe. I'm not feeling very safe in terms of what my customer is going to be ready to pay and what I'm going to be charging.
Thank you so much for that perspective of how things have changed. I don't think most people know the impact of the pandemic and the food supply on running a restaurant. One of the questions from the last webinar that somebody really wanted me to ask you was, you're talking about food waste.
Yes.
And the question is, how can reducing food waste have an impact on agriculture and making it more resilient?
Well, since that last seminar webinar, I joined I'm working very heavily with an organization called Food Stash Foundation in Vancouver. And Food Stash, what they do is they're rescuing perishable goods, not cans, but They rescue perishable foods, just basically from the greater Vancouver area, and then they redistribute it. And so it really got me thinking about just, how much are we wasting? 40% is a lot. And it's not just food going to the compost. The more research you do about this, it's such an unfortunate loss of money. It's such an unfortunate loss of just the fertilizers that went into growing the food, producing the food, bringing the food. To me, it's probably one of the most unfortunate, sad losses in our society. At Vidges, again, our food waste is not coming from the kitchen and the production side. Chefs are really good at not wasting food, right? Again, it's all about the food cost, right? So what goes out, what we lose control over is the customer wasting that food on the plate. And that customer, my favorite kind of customer is the one who complains that the portion size is so small for the price and then doesn't finish their meal. That's like, wow. That's a real winner for me.
There are no problems with portion size of the Vidges, I can tell you.
Well, no, but it's that complaint. It's the perception. It's the marketing. Again, if you're a local restaurant, people are more forgiving, right? If you're not, then people have these big expectations for value. So just to give an example, so basmati rice is it's a cultural thing for us. It's on Hiranja, it's our fairy tale romance from the 1700s. So basmati rice takes less water than regular rice, but it's much more expensive because it's harvested only once a year. But at Vidges, we give basmati rice out. It's a complimentary, rice and naan is complimentary when you come and dine. So you get people constantly asking for more rice, but then not, again, it's the whole idea of not finishing it. So in 1 kg of rice, it's about 4,000 liters to produce it back home in India. So it's not just rice going into that compost, it's 4,000 liters of water that went into it. It's the work of the farmer that has gone into it. It's bringing it from India to the UK where it gets polished. And then from the UK, it comes to Canada and distributed. It's the whole entire cycle of how did that food get to your plate? That is the big waste that we're talking about. And basmati rice has gone up about 20% since the pandemic, since we've, in the past couple of months. So again, it's all about the perception, but and then on the farm side, I hear all the time as well. One of the first things we did about I think 15 years ago, a local farmer said to me, Meeru, I've got all this butter, I've got all this squash. And it was the end of the season. And he said, I don't want to compost it. I don't want to. It's just too painful for me. Do something with my squash. And then as a local restaurant, then you do feel great. You call other restaurants and you say, okay, he's got all this squash here, and you come up with a new dish. And so you've stopped it from going into the compost, and you feel good about that. But this is just one tiny restaurant in a tiny city. And so again, when you multiply that, the food waste is, well, first of all, if it goes into the landfill, we're talking about methane, right? We're not talking about CO2. So we're talking about the future as well of the waste. And this is something that at Vidges, I feel like this is where we restaurants do come in, where we provide our pedestal and we advertise like, hey, we don't waste food. Now, it won't be that cheesy, but that's where we restaurants come in. I feel that, that's what we can promote is the food waste, and how do you get it to your customers?
Thank you for making that connection between what's happening at your restaurant and what's happening with agriculture. Peter, I was wondering if I could move to you and ask you what it's been like over the past couple of years for your whole industry, and what insights can you share with the audience about what's the impact of the pandemic and everything on the growing industry?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Santa. I think the last time we met, we thought the world had changed. And then from that time to now, God, has the world changed. It's certainly a different world. Farmers are getting hit, whether it's through supply chain, climate change. Growing today is not what it used to be. Cost of production is going through the roof. We have This war that's broken out in the Ukraine, it's causing more pressures on the farms. So yeah, the whole world kind of feels like it's turned upside down, Santa, especially in agriculture. And there's probably no place better than here in the Fraser Valley that has experienced and seen what climate change has done. And for the first time, as British Columbians, as Canadians, we're starting to see our shelves go empty. And food security is becoming a very national conversation. In fact, I think it's becoming a global conversation that food security has become top of mind. In fact, I was at this conference, NCFC, which is the National Council of Farmers Co-ops. And it was about, I don't know, $500, $700 billion of revenue of co-ops, food companies in the room. And the number one call out, the biggest concern that the food industry has is that production on the continent is dropping. And the source of that is climate change. And what was surprising to me, even the cost on the crops, the production of the crops for animal feed is dropping as well. So, we're into this crisis. And we had this Deputy Secretary of Agriculture in the Biden administration actually spoke to the conference and said, today, the Biden administration sees food security as important as national security. So, this is like a huge wake-up call. And I can tell you, when those shelves start going bare, that's when people start panicking. So food security is a big conversation. And with climate change, I think that the consensus out of this conference was that the only solution, as you have crops going down on this continent, you have global demand, especially in Asia, going up. The demand for food is stronger than ever, and the supply of it is reducing. So the consensus was around technology. Technology is going to be the solution as going forward. And some of these big cooperatives, these farmer cooperatives have got together like Land O'Lakes and Growmark, and they're investing billions of dollars, and they're teaming up for the first time on looking for startup ag tech operations and saying that this is going to be how we source food. I give the provincial government a lot of credit. They're initiating allowing ag tech to be now in British Columbia, and that's the ability to vertically grow food on less land and to have more production. You can talk to, I don't know, talk to everybody on this panel and ask them, what does food security mean to you? To me, it's pretty simple. It's relying less on others and being able to grow it here. And there's no reason why we should be driving, any produce 2,000-3,000 miles away to bringing it here. With regards to us having to start taking more responsibility about growing food here, California, I think it's no secret, is running out of water. And in the next decade, it is now believed that 1 million acres of farm production is going to be lost. And the California legislature is now talking about stopping food production, leaving the state. And I can't tell you enough that how much do we rely on food from California here? And so this is a real wake-up call. And I can tell you, in America, when I was sitting in this conference, it was the first time actually I got a lot out of this conference. It's usually a bunch of farmers getting together and drinking beer at the end of the day, but everybody was really concerned. And now, as we see, cost of food, you talked about it with your restaurants. But I think we've been really lucky on this continent that we really haven't paid a lot for food compared to other parts of the world. And I think that's changing. I think that's really going to start changing. And we're going to have to start getting used to higher food costs. It's just going to be a reality. So what do I see in our industry? I guess I should answer your question. And but yeah, no, we're seeing our crops diminish. We're seeing that climate is really having a big impact. You can see it in this province. If it wasn't a heat dome, record temperatures, it was the rainstorms that have come, the flooding that has come. So farming is certainly, conventional farming will still be there, but I think other parts have to equally be a big part of the solution going forward.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I get to all the panelists. John, this is almost a perfect segue into your participation in Globe this week, where you've been talking about the future of food production in Canada. What great takeaways and solutions came out of that conference?
Yeah, thank you, Santa. Let me start also by welcoming the people online who I think are joining us from around the world, which is great to have this kind of global conversation as we all get back into a bit of a hybrid existence. And Santa, if I can concur with your first point about UBC being one of the country's great national institutions, absolutely. And congratulations to you for making it even greater.
Thank you.
Quite seriously. It's one of Canada's great institutions, but also great exports to the world with all the talent and IP that the university produces. Let me touch briefly on what we're starting to call Farmer 5.0. So you referenced a piece we did a couple of years ago called Farmer 4.0. And for those of you not familiar with 1 to 4.0, 1 was basic agriculture, manual labor, hands and livestock. 2 was energy sources, electricity, steam, electricity, diesel. 3 was chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers that allowed us to multiply production. And 4.0 was about software and about using data increasingly to enhance what we did through 1 to 3. Farmer 5.0 is about the climate farmer. And this is becoming an increasingly critical point for Canada and a really interesting opportunity for the country that we're spending a lot of time at RBC. We have joined something called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is under the UN. It's something Mark Carney is leading, that commits us to disclosing the emissions that we finance right across our lending portfolio. So no surprise, oil and gas is probably the biggest source of emissions from our lending. Agriculture is right up there. And this is something we're talking to farmers about, we're talking to food producers about. We're going to need to understand your emissions over time. This isn't an overnight thing, but we're going to need to document your emissions, or you're going to need to document your emissions and share that data with us so that we can share with the public, with the regulators, with governments. This is where the finance system sees emissions going. This isn't punitive. This is actually an opportunity to show success. And the public and governments are really hungry for success. So see this as an opportunity for those who can get out in front of this. And agriculture has a tremendous opportunity because of soil capture and nature-based solutions, which will be part of that equation. So as we talk to farmers, be they livestock or grains or seafood producers, we want to understand their thinking on the capture side as well as the emission side, and think that this can in many places net out positive and be a positive asset to Canada's climate strategy. It's going to be a lot of hard work over the next few years. This is why we're sitting down with producers, with growers, with regulators, with retailers, because they're very keen to understand this. They're going to have to share this with, and I shouldn't say have to, I think they want to share it with all of us as consumers, so that when we are maybe ordering a fantastic meal at Vidges, it's not just the price on the menu that will be a data point for consideration. There may be a data point that allows us to understand the impact on climate, and hopefully that will increasingly be a positive impact, and that allows all of you as if you're producers, or all of us who want to support you in that, to create an enhanced brand or enhanced brand value. This is going to be critical, not just for us in Canada. We're firmly of the view that agriculture needs to be and can be Canada's export growth engine of the decade ahead. We estimate there's a reasonable 25% expansion of Canada's food exports over the coming decade, and that takes it to be bigger than automobiles and aeronautics combined. So this is a major dominant Canadian export. The more we can articulate for buyers around the world that this is not only great food, including cranberries, it is an add to your own climate plan wherever you are. Last point, just to add to what Peter was saying about California, we're also a major food importer, and we are importing a lot of emissions. It's not just the water challenge in California. Every time we buy a food product, there's an emissions trail to that. And we're going to have to start to think about that. And do we want to be buying essentially emissions from another country? Do we have a responsibility for that? Or do we want to be exporting more and consuming more of our own, more sustainably produced food? So a lot of strategic movement there, a lot of opportunities for the academic world to think through some of these challenges, for all the data geeks in the room to think about this new frontier of Farmer 5.0 that's going to be data-led, for farmers in the room to think about the tools, technology, data sets you're going to need, and how all of us who are trying to be part of that story can help bring those together. So terrific opportunity. Of course, if we ignore it, it's going to bite us. But I think folks like the ones beside me on the panel are pretty good at getting ahead of those opportunities. So we're excited about the years ahead.
Thank you very much, John. We'll have some more time for conversation as a group because a lot of things are going to have to come together, as you point out. Technology, we're going to have to make sure that the workforce is equipped to be part of the solution. And we know it's coming. We have to be proactive, and we'll talk about that as a group. So thank you for that, John. I'd like to turn to Kat now. With your experience in sustainability, and we're proud that you're an alum of UBC, from your perspective, how do you think climate change will continue to impact the agriculture sector in the future, looking into this glass bowl, and why do you think sustainability is important in agriculture?
I think agriculture and agribusiness depend on climate at every stage of its production cycle, and they often experience the impacts of climate change firsthand. When an extreme weather event happens, farmers are one of the most vulnerable groups of people. Like Santa said, some of them are at risk of losing both their livelihood as well as the homes they grew up in. And some of the homes are passed down generation after generation. And I think that is just heart-wrenching. I hope by now we can all agree that climate change is inevitable. Like all the panelists have said so far, they all touch upon some climate change issues. I like to paint a picture how it could look like for us. So this could mean higher temperature in all seasons, harder to predict weather patterns, and more frequent and severe extreme weather events. Some regions could experience extended periods of droughts during growing season. And the UN recently published a report. They predicted that some regions could experience 200 or more days in a year where outdoor work is no longer feasible by mid-century. With all the increased in temperature and the frequency of extreme events, such as the number of hot days and the number of heat waves, all of this will strongly affect the human activities and the productivity and well-being of farm animals. And there are a lot more impacts. I don't want to list them all here. Overall, I think it's just going to become more challenging for the agriculture sector due to its sensitivity to the climate. And I think the impacts of climate change would substantially have direct and indirect impacts on the profitability and productivity of agriculture sector. I think we need to have sustainable agriculture practices. So we need agriculture sector to help us remedy the mess that caused by us. We need to find ways to find solutions to ensure the sustainability in agriculture, because it is vital to our lives. It is vital to our next generation's lives. And I think it doesn't matter what you eat, all roads lead to agriculture. So like Peter said before, sustainability is vital to our food security of the future.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah.
So Rickey, a number of arrows, I think, point to universities, your faculty in particular. We've talked about technology and training, data analytics. How can universities, actually all of us here, from the restaurants to the universities and financing and technology and farmers, how can we collaborate better? And how can universities be a stronger contributor to the solution? Because time is of the essence.
Sure, thanks, Santa. I think part of the solution to the question you've asked is understanding who has what and who does what. You know, I think that's been one of the challenges, regardless of whether we're in the province or the country. And by finding out who has what and who does what, I think we can forge these wonderful collaborations, you know, whether it be in the private sector or in the academic sector or in the industrial sector or whatever sector. And I think we need to do more of that. So it's a question of communication. What role can universities play, Santa? You know, under your guidance, I think UBC has been a leader in sustainability. And that has driven not only the curriculum at the university, but the research at the university and the outreach at universities. I think more of us have to take on that strong leadership role in those issues. And I think if there was one issue that came out of the pandemic and I think I identified this right at the beginning, this whole need for us to be much more reliant, and Peter said this also, about our local food supply. With the next challenge, whatever that may be, whether it be, you know, the next version of COVID or whatever the challenge, if borders close, the global food supply system that we've all become accustomed to may not be there. And we're going to have to rely on new technologies to actually help us preserve the foods that we grow. And Peter, I think, you know, kudos to you and the task force report, because I think that identified the need to ramp it up on ag technology. And I see Mike Mannion in the audience today. And Mike, congratulations on the session you had yesterday. And there was a wonderful announcement about the investment in ag technology. And that's the way that the world will go, I think. And John, that all started off maybe from your Farmer 4.0 report. And, you know, John, I was looking back and you know how COVID has kind of warped our sense of time? That's 3 years ago, I think, John, that report came out. So, you know, I'm going, kudos to you, John, for having that crystal ball and looking into the future. So thank you all to the panel members. So Santa, I think I'll conclude there.
I'll ask you a point question.
Yeah.
So there's going to be this presence here in Fraser, in Surrey. What kinds of things would you see how we could come together physically in a space with farmers to help them? What can you see we could do? Because it's about collaboration, right?
Yeah, you know, Santa, you know, the beautiful thing about UBC taking a presence in the Fraser Valley and Surrey is that we're going to be close to understanding some of the issues that they face. And those are the practical issues that they face. And how can universities be an engine to help solve some of those problems? And I think we're all in a market-driven society right now. You know, the days of researchers at universities having solutions and looking for questions, I think is going to wane. And it's going to be What are the questions and how can universities reverse engineer those solutions? And we have the perfect audience here to help us do that.
Thank you so much. Well, we really do look forward to working with you, and I hope that you will reach out to us so that we can brainstorm together about how we can be part of the solution. Now, all of you probably have thought a lot about what it's going to take, right, with the 5.0 approach, and it really takes all of us rowing in the same direction. We need government involved. What are some of the gaps? Let's be honest. You know, we talked a little bit about getting closer to the farmer and that proximity being, you know, a driver, but all of you have a different perspective. What are some of the gaps that we should address so that we can address this pressing problem? Any of you?
I'll take a shot where we see the gaps today. Listen, I think sometimes we take a narrow look at what food security means. And I think what I mean by that is there's a feeling that it begins at the farm and ends at the farm. And I don't think so. I think it does begin at the farm, but it ends at the shelf. And that's where all of our consumers, 99.999% consumers, buy their food from the shelf. And what I said earlier, those shelves start going bare, people start panicking. And as we can start looking and changing how we grow differently, I think the other pieces, once it leaves the farm to the shelf, we need to fix those pieces as well. And today, I think there is a capacity issue, a capacity strain on processing. And there is a lot of waste at the farm level because it can't get into processing. You can grow it. Sometimes there's not, the quality is different, but not to say it can't be used. You know, I think the cherry growers, it's actually outrageous how much food they have to throw away through innovation and having extra processing. We can actually get it to a market. But I think the problem just isn't going to get fixed on the farm. It's going to have to go all the way through to the shelf, and there are issues. And at Ocean Spray, we're right from the farm to the shelf. We're vertically integrated, and I can tell you today we're having a huge problem finding capacity.
How do we systematically study? You touched upon some of the things that the gaps that we could address at the farm, and some of those probably would be unfair to expect the farmer to absorb that and resource that, right? So we probably should have a national strategy on how to support the farmer. So how do you think we should, maybe John, you have an idea of how we can systematically look at that and identify those gaps?
Yeah, we've been pushing for more of a national strategy on many of these agriculture approaches. And there's that classic Canadian concern about federal provincial dynamics. And we just have to get over it because there's too much at stake here, whether it's our climate strategy, our place in the world, or national food security, which we all should have seen as a wake-up call in the pandemic. There's I think 4 or 5 critical gaps that we've got to come to grips with. One, definitely the consumer. Canadian consumers will not pay for anything extra pricing, as all of you as producers know, but retailers who are trying to enhance the sustainability of their products just cannot pass on that price to consumers, except at an elite level. So somehow we have to work our way through that. Secondly, demographics of the sector are a real challenge, but also an opportunity as there's a bit of a shift change on the farm. Maybe there's a leapfrog opportunity, and educators are really critical to that, seizing people when they're still hopefully on the upward part of the learning curve to want to take on all of these challenges and collaborate. Be that as it may, margins right through the food system are incredibly tight and do not allow for the investments that are needed. So this is where a public-private cooperation needs to be found. We're exploring ways from a financing point of view. How do we help farmers, for instance, who are investing, let's say, in regenerative agriculture, which costs money? There's no return economically in the short term. How do we get them the working capital where the payback may not be for years? But if they have a potential for a carbon credit through regenerative agriculture, someone else is going to be willing to pay for that credit. So how do we create a market that allows, say, a company that's looking for credits, or someone down the value chain in the food ecosystem willing to transfer that, pay up front, so the farmer has the working capital to manage that? That's where a financial institution like RBC can play a role, and something we're leaning into right across the sector. That said, the data is really weak. So the more universities can do to help us there, it is probably the weakest sector, frankly, the major sector that we deal with in terms of quality. I'm talking about emissions data that we need to get going with. That's a solvable problem. The last point I'd make, which is often ones that a point across sectors that Canadians are not honest with each other about, which is scale. And when we look at the scale challenges and opportunities of agriculture, it's just not there in enough of Canada. So a simple example is manure, which is a major source of methane. If you go to a dairy or cattle farm in California, there are now manure lagoons, and it sounds gross, but this is how it's working, that have essentially tents over them to capture the emissions and to turn that into energy that is going back to run the farm. But those farms have 10,000 head, typically. Big operation in Canada maybe has 1,000. We just don't have the scale to be investing in the technologies. That's a classic Canadian problem. We've overcome it for generations, but we're going to have to really work together across public, private, academic, finance sectors to do that.
Meeru.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit of a reality check here. I was talking about food stash, and we're talking about food security, food insecurity. In 2021, during the pandemic, food stash rescued 73,000 pounds of perishable foods a month. And that was just in the Vancouver area. This is food that was overstocked at the grocery stores, not sold because they weren't pretty to look at the grocery store. And that's it. Just overstocked food. So 73,000 pounds a month was just unsold food meant for composting or the landfill. So while we're talking about food insecurity, we have a lot of food that's also potentially going to waste just in one city here. And then as far as I want to touch upon the regenerative farming, agriculture and farmers. So I didn't have money from RBC, which I might actually come back to later. So I did. So you know what? During the pandemic, I started a pilot project on this, and I thought, I personally do care about regenerative agriculture. I do think it's going to have to play a large role in our future, along with vertical farming and everything. So I thought, okay, it's not fair to put the burden on the farmer. It's all of us just keep, I think the farmer, he, she, they would be appalled if they saw their food, right, being picked up by a pickup truck because it never got sold and it's perishable or what have you. And so I did a pilot project, and it's baby food, and it's the food. I paid the farmers full price for what they wanted, for their blueberries, for their sweet potatoes, for their beets. And the pricing model I've done is income based. So you are paying according to your income, and the whole point is accessibility. So food security to me also has a lot to do with how accessible is it, because the reason why 73,000 pounds a month is going to waste is because that 73,000 pounds is not accessible to a lot of people with different income levels. So we need to address accessibility of food if we are going to talk about the security of food.
I mean, in sort of a crude way, you do have that with the different kinds of markets, right? So from Whole Foods down to cheap, to Save On, even different brands, and you just go to the stores, you can see the same product has slightly different prices. But you're saying something much more extreme than that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to add
Yeah.
2 more points. So the first one, I think the certain amount level of distress is inevitable for us. So we need to be we need to put a stronger emphasis on helping the farmers to adapt to the climate change. So we need to be better at planning at what to plant and when to plant them. And we need to learn how to deal with extreme events like flood and drought when they actually happen. So we need to have better emergency response and support systems in place. And another point I like to make is that I think doesn't matter what you do in what industry you're in, the most important thing is putting people first. So to have a sustainable future in agriculture, we need to take better care of the people. We need to normalize the conversation about mental health. I think just personal contact that I know, a lot of people who work in the industry, they experience a lot of stress and anxiety and maybe even depression. So we need to make sure that it's no longer a taboo to be talked about. And we need to pay more attention and have better support system in that way.
Thank you. I want to make sure we've got some great questions from the audience. So I want to make sure because of time we get to some of those questions. Some of them are directed at specific panelists. The first one is to you, John. Canada's emissions reduction plan was released this week. What's your impression on the plan, as well as the implications for Canada's ag sector?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's an ambitious plan. It shouldn't surprise anyone because it's basic math, but I found it very sobering, even alarming, how much we have to do in a very short period of time. And this is going to be right across the economy. Every sector is going to have to accelerate a transformation if it's not already begun at a speed and scale that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. I mean, to get to 20% new electric vehicle sales, for instance, by 2026 is just mind-bending. If you think about the supply chain challenges that exist today, what we're going to have to do in oil and gas, a 40% reduction in emissions, while the world is demanding more Canadian oil and gas, and even Prime Minister Trudeau is saying we'll probably have to increase output by 1 million barrels. This is going to be a fascinating technology race. It is our equivalent of the space race of the 1960s, and it's going to require every sector to move at a speed. We're going to have to take risks. We're going to have to take risks that we're not always comfortable with in this country. Betting on technologies, scaling them. Maybe they're not ready, but we did that in COVID. We got things done in this country and in other countries with a speed because we felt an urgency, and we're going to have to ensure that we're reminding ourselves of the same climate urgency. With respect to ag, I was intrigued that it got, frankly, a little downplayed in the estimations. The focus is largely on oil and gas and transportation, buildings as well. Ag is going to take time because of all the challenges that we've been discussing. But I think from an opportunity point of view, we shouldn't be waiting or just thinking, okay, this is something we can take care of in the 2030s. We'll have plenty of work to do in the 2030s, but let's get going with it now because of the opportunity to improve efficiency of food production, but also enhance that brand value for Canadian exports at a time when the world is needing and asking for more Canadian food. So we'll need to be exporting a lot more. So I hope maybe this forum can just give a bit more of nudging to various groups to say, let's not sit back and leave it up to oil and gas, for instance, or leave it up to all those cool electric vehicles. Let's make sure that the Farmer 5.0 transition is at the forefront. A good part, just last point on the announcement, was that there was close to $1 billion of funding for agriculture related investment and spending on climate activities. So let's hope that money gets deployed very quickly, and that it leverages not just $1 billion sounds like a lot of money. We've estimated our RBC, we're going to require $2 trillion over the next 25 years as an economy, $80 billion a year is going to have to go into climate-related investments. This is not spending. These are good investments. That's going to be largely private sector money, our savings going into productive investments. But I'd love to see as much of that as possible in food systems, in new technologies, in new systems that are going to deliver healthy returns.
Thank you for that. I think the next question probably is for Rickey, but anyone can chime in. The question is, how can we ensure that young people, K through 12, university, are educated on these issues of food insecurity and food production?
Well, thanks, Santa. I think one of our biggest challenges through the years has been the issue of food literacy and having children understand where their food comes from and how it's processed. And I think Peter and John and Meeru and Kat have done a wonderful job of doing that. You know, it's amazing that if you talk to some of the children in the urban school system, where their food comes from, they have no idea. I have a friend who teaches at UPEI, and believe it or not, he put a picture of a potato in a tree, and he asked the students, is there anything wrong with this picture? One brave student put up their hand and said, "Sir, I think that potato is unripe to be picked." Case in point of food literacy. The whole art of cooking, I think, has become something, and Meeru, maybe you can comment on this, during the pandemic. I think people rediscovered how to cook food because we are in a society now where at universities, and Santa, I think you probably have experienced this, where cooking to students is taking off the wrapper and putting it in the microwave and punching in a couple of minutes. And that's their idea of cooking. So Meeru, your ideas around culinology and the rediscovery of cooking.
There are a lot of online Zoom classes being done. So I was offering it to our customers as well at Vidges. Like, if you actually have the nerve to email me, I will do a Zoom cooking class for free with you and up to 8 people. So there was a lot of interest in cooking at home, but I don't think necessarily that interest is going to continue once the pandemic is gone. That was something we had to do in an emergency situation. It was more artisanal, for lack of a better word. But I do think that food literacy, it's going to have to take off its, again, it's about accessibility to more people. It's going to have to, unfortunately, take off its university edge. Like, I remember at UBC Farm, we hosted Michael Pollan. We hosted Michael Pollan at UBC Farm, and this is many years ago. And I cooked a local, we cooked goat curry and vegetables and everything. We were walking through the farm, and he said that when he wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma, when he wrote the books that he didn't mean for just the college graduate students to start hailing his books, that it's an intellectual thing. That was not his purpose. He said he wanted the students to take it, but he wanted it to get spread out to as much of the community as possible. And so I think where the universities and the students' job is don't keep it like this, right? You're gonna have to like blow out the fairy dust of food literacy. And so that, I think, is an important job for the universities, is not keep it up at the ivory tower, but spread it out as much as possible. And Michael Pollan was still trying to figure that out himself, is how do I get my message out to more than the educated university?
Yeah, the point
People.
well taken. But that is something that universities can do better. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Mr. Stackhouse, can you please give some examples of RBC actions and commitments to invest in quantifying on-farm emission and carbon credits?
Yeah, it's something we're working on very actively and trying to form consortia because we can't wait for government to shape this. So we're looking at subsectors of agriculture If anyone wants to explore this further, please reach out to me. I'm at john.stackhouse, so first dot last name at rbc.com. I'd love to include you in these conversations because this is going to require a real Team Canada effort. So we are working with some of the country's biggest retailers, producers, and subsets of growers to figure out exactly that question: how to, which technologies to use for measurement of emissions on site as well as capture, and then how to build that into a trading system. There's good emissions trading systems globally as well as in Canada. We've got a very strong trading desk in this area. But what we need to do is probably start with a closed loop market where we're going to have some of the big buyers, for instance, who will want to buy the credits from the farmers so that they can invest in whether it's regen ag or those manure systems to ensure that the growers have that financial incentive to move. We're also looking at new technologies and trying to connect them to all ends of the ag system. Half of agriculture emissions come from three sources: fertilizers, animal processes, digestive tracts mainly, and transportation. It's largely ground transportation, it's trucking. It's really interesting on the trucking side. I spent time in Burnaby yesterday with a really impressive company called Loop Energy that's building hydrogen fuel cell boxes for trucks. So that they can do exactly this for the large food trucks that we all see on the highways, that those can, within time, and hopefully it's a short period of time, convert to hydrogen fuel cells. Unfortunately, right now, most hydrogen fuel cells are ideal for inner city, all those little Amazon trucks booting around. They don't have the surge capacity to, say, accelerate a big food truck, an 18-wheeler, onto a highway. But Loop is getting there, so are other competitors in the system. So we're keen on helping companies like that grow, but also ensuring that the technology gets distributed again with a speed and scale that we haven't seen historically.
Thank you. I'm not sure who this question is for, but it deals with the rising and exorbitant price of purchasing or leasing agricultural land. And that farmers don't have many options, even if they want to scale and grow in terms of their output. So what can we as a nation do to think about how to support farmers in terms of either purchasing or leasing space so that they can actually produce more product?
Maybe I'll take a shot at that. So people wanting to farm, that's great to hear. Land is very price sensitive, and especially in the lower mainland. I think there's parts of Canada that land is inexpensive, and if you want to farm, that's somewhere to go. Also, I think one of the problems that we didn't talk about is people. How can you get people to come and work on farms? It's great that this technology company is solving the problems for trucks, but in the US today, there's 80,000 truck driver shortage. And the average age of truck drivers today is 60 years old. And millennials and Gen Zs, they're not prepared to sit in a truck and drive across the country. So that's great. To me, it's about keeping it local, and people is a huge issue. Farms, I don't know, maybe the question is around a hobby farm and that, but I'll tell you, a commercial farm. If we didn't have foreign workers today, we wouldn't have farms. We've got a serious people problem on farms today. We can't get them, and that's a massive problem.
Thanks for bringing it up. Rickey, what is the best strategy to access and evaluate regenerative agriculture practice throughout BC?
Yeah,
Anybody else can chime in. Anybody else?
that's a good question, Santa, but maybe I'm just going to add on to Peter's response, and John, I'd be interested in your cut on this. I think traditionally, a lot of the producers, growers feel that they're not part of the value chain. You know, they feel that most of the value is added post farm gate.
It is.
And so we need to figure out a mechanism, Peter, John, of how that wealth is shared with the growers. You know, I can recount my discussions with the first year ag class at Guelph, and many of them had come from either dairy farms or cash crop farms. And I would ask them, how many of you are thinking of going back to your family farm? And it was amazing how many said they weren't, because they saw their parents work, you know, 24/8, you know, and see very little return. And they wanted to have a lifestyle that wasn't 24/8, but gave them a livable lifestyle. And so, Peter, John, any comment on how we can change that system of sharing in the wealth, I guess?
Well, I don't know how,
Yeah.
but I will tell you, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
You know, even inflation right now, where you go to the grocery store and you're paying record prices for food. There may be a few commodities where the farmer is benefiting
Yeah.
it, but the price is really post-farm to
Yeah.
shelf. All of those costs have gone up.
Yeah.
The farmer isn't making anything more when you're saying, you know, paying record pricing on the shelf. It's not going back to the farmer, it's being absorbed. So I don't know. I mean, that sounds like a more of an academic question, how you make that, or a government question,
Yeah, a policy. Yeah.
policy change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, any comment?
Well, just a couple of thoughts maybe to add. One is the challenge of scale and intensity, and how do we continue to pursue that in sustainable ways, but that those are necessary to the economic model, especially when your input costs, including land, are going up higher than your price. The only way you bridge that is through innovation, and that often requires scale and intensity. Secondly, is to find ways, and hopefully to avoid supply management in this, but to ensure a greater share of the end value goes to the producer. The market on its own is probably not going to figure that out, because you've got essentially 5 retailers in the country, a dozen major producers, and then tens of thousands of growers. Well, you know, any Econ 101 course will tell you where the most rent is going to go in the equation. It's going to go to the part of the spectrum that has the smallest number of players. So that's where you get interventions in supply management, and that works to a degree, comes with complications as well. There's other market models that we should be looking at to ensure that kind of more of what we all pay for food ends up going to the folks at the front end of the spectrum.
Can I just pick up on the scale piece? I think you're right. I think that's the solution. But what's the implication of scale? That a lot of family farmers are not going to be able to participate. That's just going to be the reality. So scale is exactly what's going to happen. But I think we all got to start getting comfortable with the idea is that the family farm is going to be something that we're not going to see a lot of. And what we may see is more of a corporate farm, because scale suggests it's going to be more of a bigger business coming in.
But you also mentioned indoor farming, which is just fascinating.
Yeah.
Nascent. So we shouldn't jump to too many conclusions on what's essentially in an experimental stage. But when you think of what indoor farming or controlled environment farming can be in a family farming context, that becomes suddenly very, very interesting, because you're able to contain literally the physical dynamics and requirements of it. You can control better the environment and not be kind of at the whims of nature so much. So some complications there, but there could be a bit of a balance that allows the intensity without the requirement of traditional scale that leads to that corporatization.
Yeah, and it's the flexibility where through policy change you could start doing that. But absolutely, vertical farming is going to be or regenerative is going to be a part of the longer solution.
I also wanted to add to that. So I feed about 200 people a day, on average, about 200 people a day. I think there's always going to be, I'm here representing culture in a way. I think there's always going to be the importance of having that small farm, having, the farmers markets, having the small farmers there as well. And my Bible, even for running my restaurants, as far as my food is concerned, is the Eat Lancet Commission on Food. And that was in February of 2019, and I highly recommend that you look it up. But they focused on our diets, food production, and food waste. And one of the things that they were promoting in there was not necessarily more farmland for the traditional size of farming, but what they were promoting is no more farmland, but being more efficient within the farms that we have in terms of be more efficient in fertilizer use, be more efficient in tilling, and going back to the regenerative. So it's going to have to be a mixture of different things. It can't just be one way of the big corporate farm, or there's always going to have to be room to allow for, again, culture and food. We can't unlink those two together.
Yeah, and
We cannot unlink them. Yeah.
hopefully some of the ag tech that's actually happening here in BC, places like Terramera, will be helpful in as to your point, enhancing the efficiency of the farms that farmers have. And I love the indoor farm. I know it's a pilot. Do you have some insight how that's going? There's a lot of that happening in Calgary and in Edmonton, right? Some of the buildings.
Yeah, I was told to use this. Yeah, and a lot of it going on around here. BC is the clean tech capital of Canada, and in many ways should be the clean tech capital of the world. 25% of Canada's clean tech companies are in the Greater Vancouver area. A lot of those can be turning their ambitions to agriculture, and it's just a perfect environment to do that. So we're seeing whether it's Terramera or Cubic Farms, really interesting things going on. It's testing, so test and learn, fail and learn. But then when things start to succeed, start to scale. So this is a really good environment, including because of the physical pressures. So we have concerns about land prices, but in a way that forces innovation. So let's not treat it entirely as a bad thing. When prices go up, let's see it as an incentive to innovate and find new models.
Thanks for that.
Santa,
go ahead.
sorry,
Yeah.
jumping, but indoor growing, it's happening in Europe. It's really ramping up in the United States right now. So that production, that technology is live, and it is starting to go pretty strong in those areas.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm not sure who this question is for. It's the current plant-based trend or popularity. What effect will that have on the food industry, all the way from the restaurant to agriculture itself? I don't know if you want to start, Meeru?
So from the restaurant point of view, for all of this talk, my number one seller is lamb. My number two seller is chicken. My number three seller is goat, actually. And so the plant-based, I think, is very important. Don't get me wrong. I do find it's a very important newcomer. And a lot more food literacy needs to happen. Again, before we start saying, hey, plant-based is going to take over this or save that or anything. I support it. I do. I support it, but I'm not seeing the numbers.
Is that bearing out in the agriculture? There's not much of a.
Yeah, I think, Santa, the opportunity here for the shift to plant-based food is to value add to commodities. I think a classic example of where community has really benefited is the omega-3 milks, where there's, a value add there, and the producer is getting, some benefit from that value add. So we need to think of commodities as not only the commodities, but a source of ingredients for other products. And I think that's one way that producer groups can probably share in the wealth of the food value chain.
One thing for sure, I want to add. We all know this from the very subliminal bottoms of our hearts, right? That we got to eat less cow, like big time. I mean, we all know this, and I don't know how we're going to get that out there, but even on the faculty advisory board, right? And some of the members, I mean, it's a big thing. How do you get it out there? We must start, we got to really decrease our cow consumption. So that's where plant-based hopefully is, I mean, I'm Indian. And so we've been vegetarian as a culture now. Like half of us are still vegetarian, or we don't eat plant-based sausages, right? We figure out how to not eat meat without making fake meat, so.
I personally love the taste of plant-based products. I'm a big meat eater, but I just love them as a treat sometimes for myself. I agree with the food literacy side of things. Sometimes I do have doubts, and I hear people say that you know, the chickpeas they use to produce those foods or soybeans, how sustainable they are. Like, I don't know much about them. So I like to know how they source their ingredients and what's been put in those plant-based stuff. And are they coming from a lab or not? I don't know. So have more transparency on the information side of things. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah.
Thanks for that. There's a question from a farmer, and he asks, how does the farmer deal with the concentration of large corporations in control over grain and other staples, as well as meat? They control the prices. What would you say to this individual?
John for that one.
Well, it's a classic challenge in the sector, and co-op models have been reasonably good at as one way of addressing it. We're trying to think of it through the new lens of the 5.0 model, and what will this mean for farmers in terms of climate expectations. So as I said, the number one source of emissions is fertilizer. And this is going to be a very interesting dynamic for fertilizer companies to come to grips with. They're innovating a lot in this space and can probably get quite ahead of it and become, it can become an asset rather than a liability. But how is that shared with their customer? And is their customer in any disadvantaged state, for instance, if they're still required to use heavily nitrous fertilizers, for instance, if there's an extra cost to lower emissions or emissions-free fertilizer, is the farmer going to be expected to pay for that? That's something we're starting to think ahead to, because given those tight margins that I mentioned earlier, that could be fairly consequential, if not undermine the entire effort.
I think the other thing, Santa, is that customers are demanding it as well. So this whole sustainability conversation, Walmart, Costco, they're going to co-ops, they're going to farmers and saying, let's see what you're doing. How are you doing this? And you raised it on earlier about accountability on how we grow food, but it's coming now even from the customer who's getting it from the consumer. So it's just being passed down all right through.
Yeah, maybe just a last point to add to that is that a lot of change in this space is coming from the financial sector, from shareholder pressure. And most of large companies in the agriculture space are publicly traded, and their shareholders are demanding this of them. So if you're a pension fund, this is a kind of a basic requirement now of your investments. You have to understand the climate footprint of a fertilizer company or a major food producer. So the incentive is on them to get ahead of this and hopefully work with farmers and make it easy for farmers to get ahead of it, because it's in their interest.
Yeah, well, and that's the struggle, getting farmer alignment behind this, because farmers and miners, they don't like to change, and so don't bring change to us. We just want to continue doing it, but it's a reality. It's happening, and so getting farmers to think differently and invest differently is going to be a big thing to do.
I can fully appreciate it. Rickey will agree that changing things in universities moves at a glacial pace sometimes. But let me start with Kat. Great questions, everyone. Thank you so much for that. I want to give everybody an opportunity to give sort of summative remarks. What's your message you want to leave to those that are here and those who are listening via web stream? Start with Kat and then move on down.
Yeah, I like to end on a hopeful note, and I think the future is ours, and we can. I think it's a great future in agriculture, and I think we can make it better. And it's either for yourself, for the people you love, for your community, or for this blue planet that we all call home. So I think that's some message I like to leave today.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah.
John?
We use this. We've been wrestling with the dilemma of energy security and climate security. And this conversation has been illuminating for me to also think about food security and climate security. We're not going to have food security in abundance, likely in the near term. So in an era of shortages and bottlenecks, we're going to have to make some difficult progress on the climate front, and we're going to need those technologies and ability to scale those technologies, which requires risk. And farmers are actually very good at taking risks. They live with risk every day. So let's embrace that. But one of the things where we at RBC are thinking through a lot is how do we bring an ecosystems approach to this? This cannot be all on the shoulders of farmers or on producers, on packaged goods companies or on retailers. This is going to require ecosystems. And we're seeing some success here in Europe and even in the United States of ecosystems led by a Danone or a Cargill or a General Mills that we think can be replicated or probably improved on in Canada. But this is going to require not just growers and producers and retailers, but financial institutions like RBC, governments, regulators, consumer advocates to work closely, but work very quickly as well to ensure that we are investing critically at each end of the production and consumption side of food. Fortunately, that's what we Canadians tend to be good at. We're collaborative. We love the idea of mutual accommodation. We're good at working with difference. So let's kind of draw on those Canadian strengths to take on this really epic challenge, but one that can make Canada an even more critical food producer for the world.
John, let me just ask, because UBC is playing a key role in post-pandemic, hopefully resiliency with respect to future pandemics. We're in the sixth wave in many provinces and jurisdictions. But as you know, the federal government has invested considerable resource, 2.2 billion, in biomanufacturing, bioinnovation, recognizing the ecosystem is not complete in any of the major metropolitan areas, that there are pieces in each of the major metropolitan areas. And they've come to scientists and universities and industry to come up with, building on, say, the supercluster investment, strategies to build out the ecosystems, to your point. And so we're in the phase now where each of the consortia are bringing together plans to put forward in a competitive basis to fill those gaps in the ecosystem locally and nationally with that funding. Is there a similar program magnitude sufficient to your point, develop those ecosystems here that you talk about that are happening in Europe and some places in the States? Can we help in any way in articulating the need for that kind of framework?
Well, let's follow up on that, because yes, I'm not aware of one certainly that is as ambitious as we need to be. And that's a great opportunity to kind of build that collaborative model.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Peter.
Yeah, local. Figure out how we can grow more food here locally and not rely on others. Figure out having robust processing and manufacturing systems that get our food to our shelves for our population. So stop relying on other areas to bring food in. It's California one day is going to shut off the tap on us, and we're going to be running around even for leafy greens and going, how the heck are we going to find it? So I have, for me, I think that we in British Columbia here with universities building a technology on growing food differently, And to me, instead of moving food across the world, we should be developing technology here and selling the technology around the world. So every community globally can become food secure by growing their own food in their own jurisdiction. So as much as we like to export, I'd like to see a day when we're exporting our technology.
Thank you, Peter. Meeru.
For me, it's the individual, it's the person. So one thing I hope is that everybody who's here and who's listening, they're not gonna say, wow, that was really interesting, but then they're gonna leave and not connect themselves personally to what was being set up here on stage. So once you connect yourself personally to the bigger picture of things, then I think we all need to kind of exercise a lot of generosity in terms of, I don't necessarily mean your wallet, but generosity in terms of, so if you can spend $250 on a pair of blue jeans because they look really good on you, right? Maybe you can spend $4.99 on some local organic tomatoes that were farmed nicely as well. So that's the kind of generosity I'm talking about, is connect yourself to what we have said here. And I see a group of young people right there, all sitting nice and close together. 28 years ago, I didn't even know how to use a knife, right? I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't even know how to cook 28 years ago, but I kind of got into this 14-seat restaurant. And luckily, right, I was able to connect myself to, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. And so here I am sitting up on stage and feeding 200 people a day. And it's exciting. So again, it's, connect yourself to what is being said, and you are responsible for your share of it.
Well, thank you, all of you, for your comments. At the last webinar, we actually released a sort of an article, a white paper, which we're very proud of. And I think there are some nuggets here that we should share with the world as well, especially looking at ecosystems and collaborations and the use of technology and the role each of us can play. Local, Peter, I heard that. So let's look at the transcript. I might reach out to you again. I know it took quite a bit of work for all of you to contribute to that, but let's give the panelists a round of applause for everything they've done. Now I'm going to hand it over to the Dean, Rickey Yada, for closing remarks. Rickey.
Well, thanks very much, Santa. And I have the wonderful and glorious role of thanking our speakers and panelists again. Kat, thank you very much for joining us again, and welcome back to the faculty, and thank you for your optimism. And John, thank you as usual for your insight into the various issues, the gaps. There was a reason, John, we didn't put you next to Meeru, because we knew that Meeru may be leaning on you after this one. So we'll let her do that after this panel, but thank you so much, John, and welcome back to the coast. Peter, thank you as usual. Your whole concept around local. Thank you for being a strong supporter of agriculture in BC and Canada. And thank you again for the report. And I'm glad, Peter, finally it's coming to fruition, I think, some of the actions and outcomes of that. And Meeru, what can I say? You never fail to surprise me. And so thank you. And so Meeru, I think you've done okay in learning how to cook, from not knowing how to chop to running an iconic restaurant. So thank you. And thank you, Santa, for being the wonderful moderator and taking time out of your schedule, because I know a president's schedule is really packed. It's really hard to get Santa's time. And so, when Santa gave me a call, I'll just let the audience know that Santa and I had a conversation about, participating in this panel. And he said, should I participate in this panel? And he answered his own question, okay? So he knew the value of coming out here.
I said, as long as the same panelists are
here, exactly.
It's worth it.
But he wanted to really thank the people of the Fraser Valley for their resiliency, because my God, you talk about an unprecedented year, and I hope that word goes away soon. But it has been an unprecedented year, and you in the Fraser Valley have shown resiliency to the nth. And thank you again for participating here. I understand we have an audience that is participating from around the world. I think as I looked at the participant list, there were participants from Europe, Asia, Africa, and of course, North America. So thank you for those people who are joining us virtually. Stay tuned. We'll have version 3.0, and Santa will take you up on your suggestion of adding to the literature around these important issues. Before I go, I'm going to ask Virginia to help me, Virginia Hong, to help me give out some gifts. So Dave, if this falls off, I apologize. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. I guess we'll do a handshake and a rub. Thank you, Meeru, as usual. And thank you, Santa. And by the way, Santa's reference to things moving glacially. The other mental image you may want to take away with you is a ocean liner in a canal, okay? Yeah. So with that, we'll conclude the panel. Thank you so much for participating.